Blog Talk Radio.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. It is January 7th, 2015, the first show of 2015. This is your host, Andrew Fisher, normally broadcasting every Wednesday from the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to expose the true and false nature of reality for what it is and what it isn't. By the way, I don't know if anybody's listening to the show at this present moment, but if anybody gets in the chat room, let me know if you can hear me or not hear me, because last week during the Entheogen extravaganza, which I hosted by myself, I found out that for the first 15 minutes, nobody could actually hear me, and I didn't realize that until after the first 15 minutes, so all the news and everything was not on that show. I'm using Skype right now. I used Direct Connect last time, but hopefully sound won't be an issue. Did leave a note in the chat room, but anyway, getting back to the purposes of this show, I am having Neil Kramer on of neilkramer.com. And well, actually, I think this might be him in the queue. Let me just quickly get him on the air to make sure you can hear me. Hello, Neil. Can you hear me? Is this you?
Hey, yes, I can indeed. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's good that you're on, because last week I was having sound issues. I'm not going to let you on the air to talk just yet because I want to cover the news, but I was just calling you to make sure that you can hear me. This is reassuring.
No problem.
Put you on hold until no later than 10 after the hour, because I got to do the news first. All right, see you in a few minutes.
Okie doke.
Well, that answers that question. So let me start off by giving you a little bio about him. Neil Kramer is a British philosopher and esoteric expert. He explores the relationship between inner development and the many social and cultural factors that influence our everyday lives. Attention is drawn to embracing truth, confronting the negative, and transforming self. And by the way, I did copy and paste this from his bio on his website. He is a popular guest on leading alternative radio and internet shows, and has been broadcast on television networks in the U.S., Canada, Britain, and Europe. Neil has spoken at numerous international conferences. He has broad experiential knowledge of interconnected philosophical, spiritual, mystical, hermetic, and alchemical disciplines. We'll get into a little bit of everything on this show for sure. He has spent time with several orders dedicated to the wisdom of the ancient world. He consistently highlights the importance of applying abstract knowledge to the felt experience of physical life before it can accrue real value. Neil's synthesis of spiritual wisdom, social critique, anti-authoritarianism, deep knowledge base, inventive language, and no-nonsense approach has helped to develop his reputation as a widely respected figure in mystical, spiritual, and alternative communities. Sounds like my kind of guy. Yes, I'm sure I'm going to love his attitude. Never heard him before until now. I believe it was someone who recommended him. Well, I have no doubt that person deserves a commendation, because I have no doubt this is going to be a fascinating show. But before that, we will start with the news, courtesy of Alex Jones and company at InfoWars. Just let me get a quick drink here first. All right, let me start by saying there was a shooting in Paris today. I have no doubt it was a false flag. We'll get into that in a moment. That's not the top headline here. But first of all, radical leftist lesbian says right-wing extremists have killed more Americans than jihadists. A Ford Foundation operative exploits terror in Paris. Okay, this is about the Paris shooting, and right-wing extremists. A lot of people call Alex Jones that, and many other conspiracy theorists. They try to give that term a derogatory and bad name, and to say we've killed more Americans than jihadists. Yeah, considering a lot of those jihadists are funded and controlled by the United States government and also British intelligence, the Saudi Arabian government, the government of Qatar, the government of Egypt, the government of Turkey, the Mossad, and ultimately the New World Order. Yes, this is obviously going to be used to take away civil liberties in Paris and the rest of the world, no doubt. Next article, media censoring Muhammad cartoons amid Paris shooting. Oh, not this again. Fear of radical Islam creating chilling effect on free speech. Yes, I remember that South Park episode where Cartman hated Family Guy, and at the end, Peter Griffin answered the door and said, "Coming, Muhammad," and then it said, "In this scene, Muhammad is shown handing a football helmet to Peter Griffin." South Park has decided not to air this because of fear of terrorism or whatever. And, this is a deja vu of that all over again. And with all due respect to the Muslim people, I seriously think you folks in particular you Muslim followers need to stand up and show that this is all a fraud, that this is all a scam. People should not censor Muhammad. I mean, I understand that Muhammad is not supposed to be shown according to your faith, but if people do try to make cartoonish images of Muhammad and such, even if you do find it a little bit insulting, you cannot let people use that to instill fear in others, because if they do, then there goes free speech, there goes our liberty, and here comes global totalitarian government. So everybody, and I especially ask of those who follow the Islamic faith, please have people put a stop to all this censoring Muhammad bullcrap. With all due respect to your religion and with all due respect to the fact that Muhammad is not supposed to be shown, you can't let this kind of stuff continue or we're in trouble. Next article, little girl dies after flu shot injection. Well, she's not the first little girl to die after a flu shot injection. How tragic indeed. Media purposely ignores lethal adverse reactions to vaccines. Yes, and if you want to learn about all those lethal adverse reactions to vaccines, check out my interview with Leslie Manoukian, which I did back in the day. Fascinating interview. Maybe someday I'll get another vaccine expert on my show. You know me, I don't have the same guest twice. Want to get variety, get as many different people as possible. But vaccines, that's a very important issue. Even though I covered a lot in that interview, I'll probably get another guest that covers that on sometime. There's a guy on the Logos Radio Network who does a show on vaccines. I'll probably check that out. But next article here, Paris shooting. What they're not telling you. Establishment buries jihadist threat to appease PC crowd. Yes, what they're not telling us is that this was probably a false flag. I haven't had time to look in the details, but no doubt I'll be checking this out, and no doubt the evidence will show it was a false flag. I hope it isn't, but apparently it is, because they have an article here saying what they're not telling you. Next article, creepy. Little girl narrowly escapes kiss from Vice President Biden. Vice President awkwardly goes in for smooch after whispering in child's ear. Yes, you don't want to be kissed by a demon, and I say that because in my interview with Donnie Gilson, and also there is a picture of this in David Icke's book, The Perception Deception, there is an image of Joe Biden during one of President Obama's State of the Union addresses. For a brief moment, you can see Joe Biden had jet black eyes. His eyes were black. And David Icke said, well, that brings back memories of when he saw former British Prime Minister Ted Heath eyes turn black when Icke was working, I think it was as a spokesperson for the Green Party. He got a chance to meet Ted Heath face to face and saw his eyes turn black, and then many years later, someone told him she saw Ted Heath shapeshift into a reptilian alien during a ceremony in the woods, and all the people who saw him shapeshift didn't freak out at all, as though they were expecting it to happen. Is Joe Biden a shape-shifting reptilian? I don't know, but I have no doubt that he's under demonic possession, assuming his eyes truly did turn black. And this girl, you should be disturbed that he almost kissed you. All right, next article, Charlie Hebdo attacks. Charlie Hebdo, I did check this out earlier. That is that has something to do with Paris News, to my knowledge. Don't know too much about it, but I believe that is the name of the news agency. Charlie Hebdo attackers said, we're Al-Qaeda from Yemen. Yemen is a major global oil transit checkpoint. Yes, the price of oil may go down, but that's going to ruin the economy because we are very dependent on oil, and we shouldn't be, because there's technology out there that can make oil obsolete. Jim Mars did an interview on the Alex Jones show not that long back in the day where he talks about all sorts of suppressed technology. Recommend it to anyone who wants to get rid of oil and realize what other technology we have available. And these attackers say we're Al-Qaeda. Well, considering the U.S. government runs Al-Qaeda, and Paris, France, they're our allies. They run Al-Qaeda to some extent too. Shouldn't come as too much as an astonishment that this would be a false flag simply because this guy said we're Al-Qaeda from Yemen. All right, two more articles here. Paris attack. Gunman showed advanced military skills. Could it be someone who was a military expert, or was it someone under mind control, or was a trained killer sent by ISIS or a government? Who knows? I don't know. All right, one last article here. Police want cop killings added to hate crime law. Far more prevalent police violence against citizens not granted special government status. Yes, you police, you corrupt police, you just want to be above the law. By the way, there is a contest on copblock.org. I did enter the video. My video entry is on my YouTube channel, Fan of 2012. You guys have everybody's got until midnight Eastern tonight to send in a video no longer than 1 minute explaining why you think police should be filmed. But just a quick side note. Anyway, that's it with the news. Before I get Neil on, I just want to get to his website here because I would like to use his website as a guide. And let me just text out of all these ads. Even though I have put virus protection on my new computer, I still seem to get a lot of pop-ups for some reason. Hopefully it won't be a problem with this show. But I do have some people in the chat room. They can hear me. They can hear me loud and clear. Hello, Gemini Moon. Hello, MK Herndal. I can't figure out how to pronounce that, but glad to see her there. Glad some more people are popping in here. But without further ado, let's get Neil Kramer on. Neil, area code 915. I know this is you. Spoke to earlier. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
Pissed off to hear about that shooting in Paris. My gut tells me it was a false flag, even though I hope it wasn't. But we got more important things to discuss. Let's try to forget about that. Let's clear our minds and focus specifically on the subject matter at hand for this interview. You are a British philosopher and esoteric expert. And by the way, I did correct the spelling of the word philosopher, as you pointed out in that email. Just a little typo, which I did fix. None to worry about there. But I think I'll start off with the subject of philosophy because I remember when I was in college, and let me say I shouldn't have gone to college. College is a waste. I can't do jack diddly shit with my journalism degree. A lot of people can't do anything with their degrees. But anyway, it appears that nowadays in college, a lot more students are taking philosophy courses, seeming to think that it will help them in reality to follow a philosophy. However, it has been asserted by many that philosophies are meant to be a divide and conquer mechanism, and the fact that philosophies teach benevolent things is an illusion, just like how religions, they teach benevolent things, but that's all an illusion because they're designed to suppress your consciousness and also divide and conquer people. So the subject of philosophy is being used to divide and conquer by making people think different styles of thinking and different styles of going about life. What do you have to say to those anti-philosophy folks who say that?
Well, philosophy teaches you how to think. Who you tend to follow, whether you're looking at Nietzsche or Heidegger or Hegel, is another matter. It's like a language of thought, and it depends who you study with and what you study and what you do with it. Personally, for me, my study of it, as you indicated, did not happen at university because I decided that wasn't the best place to learn about philosophy. So I did it myself over a number of years. So read all the sort of, 100 classical texts from Greece and Rome and Germany and America and whatever, ancient and modern. And it just gave me as a young man an ability to organize thought in a better way. So to have a philosophy as an ideology, I think is what you're referring to, is a slightly different matter. To have, very fixed views about things, and this is my philosophy, this is what I do, this is what I believe. No, that isn't a good idea. But philosophy, philos, Sophie, just means love of wisdom. So classically, if you went back 2,000 years, the philosophers were men who loved wisdom, and that's it. So if you look at the pure interpretation of the word, it's quite a nice thing. But we can't help think about, what that means in terms of our universities in the States and in England and Oxford and Cambridge and all that. That isn't really the philosophy that I do and talk about. My philosophy is very much grounded in experience, not so much in books and scholarly things, although that's an important stepping stone. But far more significant is what you actually do with it in your life. How is it felt and experienced? How does it change you? How does it change your worldview? What does it do to you as a person? So it's very practical kind of thing. It's toes in the soil rather than sat there with your tweed suit and your pipe and your gold watch. There's not much of that in my life.
All right. Now let's see. What else can I go here? All right. Let's go to the subject. Let's go bit by bit here as the bio goes on. Esoteric. That's the next thing I have here worth talking about. When it comes to esoteric, some people seem to confuse that word in regards to what it means. Same thing with the word mystic. We'll get to that in a little bit too. But when it comes to esoteric, could you possibly define that term for all the people who are a little confused about what that means? And a lot of people say, well, I don't cover esoteric stuff. Well, maybe in a sense you do. It all depends on what your definition of esoteric is. So let's clear up the confusion about what that word means, please.
Yeah, it just means within. So it's a word that, if you go back to its Greek root esoterikos from esotero, it just means within. So if you like, there's an exoteric, that's EXO, there's an exoteric story of what happened on September the 11th, 2001. And there's an esoteric story about what happened, which is something rather different. And classically, I mean, let me answer questions about esotericism and mysticism in one go, if you don't mind. You have an exoteric thing like a religion, which is basically a way of saying to people, here's how to behave, don't kill each other, don't screw around, and behave yourself. And if you can do that, then we might share some deeper truths with you. We might show you some of our sacred knowledge. So traditionally, again, before the Christianization of Europe 2,000 years ago, religion was an exoteric, ceremonial way of teaching people different ways of behaving with little better conduct. It bears very little resemblance to what we know today. Religion, you just think of, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and it's kind of rubbish in a way. Not all of it, but much of it in Europe, certainly where I grew up. I live in the States now, but it doesn't function how it used to do. It used to serve an exoteric principle, and then once you'd proven yourself as a moral person of good character and all that, in a genuine sense this is, you would then move to the inner school, the esoteric school, where they'd say, right, you've now proven yourself to be, let's say, Jedi material. So we're going to teach you some stuff about what you can do with your mind and your body that will put you in a different kind of perspective and will give you different kinds of abilities. So rather like if we think of Star Wars, the difference between, say, Han Solo and Luke Skywalker initially is very slight. So Han Solo is a regular guy, and as Luke Skywalker goes through his thing of a regular guy, he's just the same. But as he goes through his esoteric education, he becomes something different. He becomes something more. So that story that George Lucas shares with us through this fiction of 1970s Star Wars is really an old parable of what it means to transcend your basic human structure. So esotericism is just the study of all the different systems and philosophies and ideas and people, from people like Rudolf Steiner was a very great esotericist from the sort of 1880s to the 1920s when he was alive. That's when he was working. And George Gurdjieff was a mystic and an esotericist, and he was working in the early part of the 20th century. Manly P. Hall was a great esotericist, and he was with us right up until 1990. And he was really one of the sort of forefathers of the conspiracy movement, who said, you know what, there's this great complex of fraternal and secret and esoteric societies that have stretched throughout history for thousands of years, and some of them have gone off track and sort of sequestered world government. Really pointing that out in many ways if you read between the lines in his book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And so, but he himself was a great esotericist and told us more about Buddhism and Rosicrucianism and esoteric philosophy than anyone else was doing in the 1950s and 60s, really. And he would come to New York and Los Angeles and he would lecture, and he did thousands of lectures about how esotericism still shapes society today. So in my work, my work focuses mainly on what you would call inner development. So it's not scholarly in the way that Manly P. Hall would say, let me explain lots of things. Mine is more about practicality. So in simple terms, making yourself a better person through spiritual wisdom and the development of personal insight and a sort of devotion to self-transformation. So if you want a more philosophical angle on that, you could say that I explore those classical metaphysical questions, and let's boil them down into three. What am I? What is this world? And what is the nature of the relationship between the two? So in my world, in my field, philosophy and mysticism and esotericism and alternative approaches to culture, which is what your show deals with largely from what I can understand, they're all really different ways of looking at the same thing, investigating the deeper reality of life. So a long time ago, men and women did this 3, 5, 6,000 years ago, and it's the same today. We still have to differentiate ourselves from the mainstream and say the mainstream is not really telling us what's going on. It's not really in the business of doing that. It's there to propagate and uphold an illusion. And the illusion is for people who can't be bothered to think for themselves, or who don't want to, or are afraid to. And it's like saying, yeah, we know the world's a bit scary and weird, and dark things happen, as well as light things. And if you don't want to engage in that, then you plug into this mainstream world, and will make you forget all about it, and all you'll care about is the next Apple or Samsung product, or the next movie, or the next game, or something, and forget all about it. And I would say to you that that's no different today than it was 2,000 years ago. So that's the value of philosophy, is that when we look at philosophical, mystical men from the last 2,000 years, or the last 1,000 years in particular, where there's better written records, we can ascertain that they were having the same challenges that you do in your life and with your work in esoteric and alternative matters, and I do. They were having the same challenges, so it's very instructive and helpful to say, well, what did they do? How did they approach this empire, the same empire that we're having trouble with today? What did they do? What does it mean? So it's very relevant. It's not just a bit of words on a page or pixels on a screen. It's very relevant to how we live.
Okay, and you mentioned the word exoteric earlier. A lot of people don't hear that word often. Now, would I be correct or incorrect in saying that an esoteric expert like you is not an exoteric expert, or would it actually be fair to say that the vast majority of esoteric experts are also exoteric experts? So could you perhaps clear up the confusion of what exotericism is?
Exoteric is outside. Esoteric is inside. So let me give you an example. If you live in an exoteric way, EXO, then you think that on December the 14th, 2012, a man called Adam Lanza went into a school and killed a load of children and teachers, and killed his mother and killed himself. That's an exoteric reality structure. An esoteric reality structure is to say, well, if we examine the circumstances of that event, that is not at all what happened. That is not what happened. So we have to seek a broader, deeper answer that lies within. And when you do that kind of thing, and you'll know this from examining things like 9/11, it opens up so many different avenues that most people don't want to do it. So esoteric just means the true nature of a thing. Exoteric means the appearance of a thing. That's all.
Thanks for clearing that confusion up there. Wonder why you don't hear the word exoteric much. But anyway, to the subject of embracing truth, you mentioned earlier a lot of people want to be sheeple for all practical purposes. And I have said many times on my show, and unfortunately I have to say it yet again, something I say often but hate saying it. It gets worse and worse every time I say it. I'm probably going to become famous and infamous for this, but it only makes sense to say it now, and that is that the primary reason, as far as I'm concerned, that we are in a prison planet matrix mess, and also the primary reason why it's so easy for governments to get away with all their secrets and conspiracies getting exposed all the time, is because a very significant percentage of the common people who make up the general public on planet Earth are so paradigmatic, so fearful, and so flat out stupid that they will refuse to believe something shocking or disturbing, even if the evidence shows that they have no choice but to believe it. And I should add that the reason many humans are paradigmatic, fearful, and stupid is because we were genetically engineered to be that way by forces who wanted to use us as a slave species, so they made us that way to keep us in line more easily. And if you want to learn more about that, you need to study the work of Zachariah Sitchin and David Icke. But the point is, people are sheeple. People want to be sheeple. People will refuse to believe the truth if they can't handle the truth. And that's why I'm sure the subject of embracing truth becomes very complicated to someone like you who realizes that there are a lot of sheeple out there. I hate using the word sheeple, but the word makes sense to use because the word sticks, and it does give a little bit of an in-your-face connotation there for the sake of waking people up. So this whole subject of people being lost in a trance and how to make people learn how to handle the truth, what do you have to say about that? How do you suggest we wake people up?
You wake yourself up.
You wake yourself up? How do you...
The only way you can possibly achieve anything is to first get yourself straight and illuminated and strong and clear. And until you do that, you're not in a position to do it for anybody else or make any pronouncements about what anyone else can and can't do. So that's why in what I do, this old-fashioned word, spirituality, just means getting yourself strong. It means that you are an eternal kind of being an animal temporarily on this planet, to examine some of the things that are occurring here. And to get yourself powerful is the business of becoming a spiritual person. Only when you've done that are you in any position to communicate with any other people who are, awakening. My advice, as you indicate, is don't worry about waking people up, because the individual can only ever wake themselves up, and that is a long process. You can't do it just with information and knowledge. You have to do it through changing the circumstances of your own life, your own being, your own conduct, your own mind, your own heart, everything. So just knowing that there's some things going on in the world by an empire does not constitute waking up. It constitutes having more information, which is good, but that isn't waking up. So I would say that very, very few people have woken up. I think it's quite a rare thing that requires a lifetime of devotion. I wouldn't say I have done it, but I'm striving to move towards it. Perhaps is another way of saying it, is to say we are deconditioning ourselves from duplicity and a delusional state of reality that has been on this planet for many, many thousands of years. And I disagree with you on a few points that you made. I don't think we've been genetically engineered. I don't think that can happen in the universe, because it contravenes the basic law, which is you cannot interfere with anybody unless they allow you to. So that has to be given to the individual. So that's a whole story. But I do think that people can be tricked into weakness and can be tricked into subservience. And a very interesting human being, Adolf Hitler, who has, a very polarizing effect on people. But one interesting thing he said before he came to, quote, power, is that you must understand that most people want to be led. They want to follow, and they want somebody to tell them what to do. And he says, once you grasp that, then you can have power. And the only thing that differentiates him from Winston Churchill is that he was more honest about it. And in his power cultivation, he was an expert psychologist. And of course, he did good and evil with that, both. And some would say more evil than good, and that's understandable. But what we're talking about is someone who understood that even the very best of people, until they accumulate insight and spiritual awareness, want to be led. They don't want to self-determine their own life and create their own world and have their own wonderful culture and govern themselves. They don't want that. And I would say 300 million Americans and 67 million Britons also don't want that. So our challenge is not presenting information to people, but is examining why is it that human beings don't want to be masters of their own destiny. And I don't think there's any extraterrestrial influence in that of any note.
Well, since you mentioned that, I think it only makes sense I have a little debate with you on this subject.
Sure, definitely. Let's do that.
To know that Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartzis, who pretty much can answer any question out there because of his Akashic Records reading skills, and that is why he is my number one source of information on my show. He said in a 20-part interview that he did with Lance White and a couple of other people, which can be found on the Creating 5D YouTube channel and also the Galactic Historian YouTube channel, he did say in that interview that Zecharia Sitchin's first 3 books are very accurate. Yes, Nibiru does exist. Yes, the Anunnaki come from Nibiru. Yes, the Anunnaki came to Earth to genetically engineer humanity by combining Homo erectus DNA with Anunnaki DNA to use us as a slave species to mine gold. Bartzis did say Sitchin was wrong about the reason the Anunnaki wanted the gold. It wasn't to shield the planet of their atmosphere, the atmosphere of their planet Nibiru. It was to lure entities to Earth. And the Anunnaki, they didn't come here on a mission. They were lured here. Now, I did meet Andrew Bartzis at the Return to Atlantis conference, the N5D Return to Atlantis conference in Sarasota in October 2013, and I addressed this with him because there are people out there who said that Zecharia Sitchin was a disinformation agent, and I asked him about that. So how could Sitchin's first 3 books have been accurate if he was a disinformer? And Andrew Bartzis told me that all those people, like Leo Zagami in his Project Camelot interview, and also Arizona Wilder, who told David Icke that Sitchin was a shape-shifting reptilian alien in his Revelations of a Mother Goddess documentary, Andrew Bartzis told me those people were mistaken about Sitchin. There are timeline watcher entities who have the ability to make people think that they are in an alternate timeline, and they, using very sophisticated means, caused Zagami, Wilder, and some other people who said Sitchin was a fraud to think they were on an alternate timeline, which caused them to spew out lies about Zecharia Sitchin being a fraud. You know, I wish the world wasn't this complicated, but it is. So aside from the fact that there are forces out there who didn't want us to know that Zecharia Sitchin was very accurate, this does, well, in a sense, show you are mistaken when you say that we cannot be genetically engineered because of, like, free will and violations of that. So do you have any rebuttal or comments about what I've just said here?
Well, yeah, I think you need to be very careful about imagining that anybody has access to Akashic records who can tell you what is true and what is not. The only person who can tell you that is yourself. So to have authority outside of yourself is always something to be careful of. Zecharia Sitchin, I've read his material. It seems very interesting to me, and I understand what he's saying, and I understand that there are natural influences, just like in the natural world on Earth, where many different ecosystems come together and create new genetic strains and new things in life, new plants, new animals, and you can't distinguish necessarily one from the other. What I'm saying is that if you want to, you know, answer esoterically as you're bringing somebody in who, I don't know who, what was his name, Andrew Barks, is it?
It's Andrew Bartzis, that's right. Bartzis, yeah.
Right, I've not heard of him, so I can't comment on his material, but I will say this to you. It has been my experience in my own development and with some of my colleagues in the field, some of whom you may know, some of whom you won't know, that to say this is a channeled message that I have, or this is a piece of Akashic data that I have, and I can confirm one way or the other, is very dubious. And although somebody may have that as a subjective, imaginal, personal experience that is real, its objective consensus experience for other people is different. So this is a very important factor in a lot of the work that happens in the alternative world, because you have people who say all different kinds of things. The world's going to end, this happened, there's this disaster, this planet, there's Nibiru coming in, there's Planet X, this, there's that, there's the other. Nobody really has the truth of what happened on this planet until you attain an extraordinary level of awareness, which then precludes you from sharing it. So let me try and answer that question in a way that I think is really, really good, because you're introducing lots of interesting ideas, which I think it's important to look at them. Let me answer it this way. The universe does not share its secrets with people who have not attained a high degree of awareness. So it's kind of like a fail-safe, an ingenious sort of foolproof method, this, of gauging the value of somebody's words. So if we still as individuals have any sort of egoic problems or any sort of agenda or any sort of psychological aberrations, which is very common in human beings, me, you, and everyone else, you can't know anything above the human realm. So let's say there's a 3D world where we are, there's a 4D world that is on the edge of it, and there's a 5D world where higher knowledge of Earth origins, Earth structures, Earth races, extraterrestrial races, all that information is contained there, right? It's very difficult to imagine that one person could come to Earth and act as an arbiter of truth for that, to either validate or invalidate someone else's discovery. I can't accept that. I haven't seen any evidence of that. And in my training in mysticism, what is shown is that when you are given the gift of history, which is a very sacred gift, you then, it is incumbent on the individual not to share that, because most people placed to process that information and aren't ready to hear it. So it remains a personal reflection. So the very wisest men of Europe, the Druids, many years ago, many millennia ago, never wrote anything down, not a single word, even though they could have done. They didn't, because they also understood that their thoughts and their perceptions about the world are given to what you call the Akashic record. So it's kind of like a big cloud storage in a surrounding dimensional space. So there's no need to write anything down, right? You don't need to, because the universe is recording all our thoughts, all our dreams, all our memories, all our images, all our imagination. Everything is being recorded in space all the time around us. And that storehouse of knowledge is what, in recent times, we've called the Akashic record. And the Druids were aware of this, and so it's a really good system, because it means that the only people who can access it are people who have straightened themselves out and purified their minds sufficiently to access it. And the trick is, once you've done that, you die. And that's the universe's way of making sure that nobody shares what is not meant to be shared here. So that is another view. And again, like you, I'm saying this is something that somebody said. But it's something that I have found to be true over and over. So it's a different approach to it. Now, do I think it's important to investigate extraterrestrials? Yes, I think that's part of life. It's like saying, don't investigate the animals of the African continent or the Australian continent. You would be foolish, because those are important factors of this ecosystem on this planet. And as we come into this business of the alternative world, we realize that there is a larger ecosystem throughout the solar system, throughout the galaxy, and throughout other galaxies, where other life forms are constantly moving around, having experiences, and interpenetrating each other's cultures. That exists. But I would still say, put a question mark on genetic manipulation. Just as a post-it note. You might throw it in the bin, but put a question mark on that. I would advise you to do that.
Oh, yes, I do question everything, but question everything doesn't mean be stupid and refuse to believe what the evidence shows. You have no choice but to believe. But speaking of which, let's get back to what we were talking about earlier in regards to embracing truth and confronting the negative and people transforming themselves, or for that matter, not wanting to transform themselves. Some radical truthers might say that we got to go to extreme lengths to wake up the sheeple. We all remember that scene in the movie They Live, where the main character beat the living hell out of his friend to make him put on the glasses. Now, there are a small minority of people.
The longest fight scene in history, that apparently.
Yes, and the point I'm trying to make is there are people out there who would say that's what we need to do to the sheeple. You got to grab them by the neck and say, wake up out of your trance, dumbass. You're making life miserable for everybody who's awake. Could you wake up out of this trance, or I'm going to make you wake up out of this trance? I mean, some say, no, you should never harass the sheeple like that. That's their problem for not being able to wake up. But on the other hand, you say, well, if they don't wake up, the longer we're going to be stuck in this prison planet matrix mess. So in regards to the issue of hassling and harassing sheeple to wake them up, do you agree or disagree with the radical truthers' ideology there?
I neither agree nor disagree. I'll tell you why. For some people, it's important to engage in a process of waking up oneself and other people, right? And somebody like David Icke does a really good job of saying, hey guys, the world isn't the way you thought it was. There's other things going on. And that's a very, very important stepping stone. it is. So you can't say it's not a good idea to wake people up. It is, and it's everybody's prerogative to do that. What I would say on top of that, and I've been to a David Icke lecture, and he does very long ones, like I do, hours and hours. He does hours and hours, and he's a good guy, and I've seen him in person. He's a good bloke, and he does important work, right? There's a stage on top of that, though, about waking people up, which is, again, from my own experiences, having done this for many years now, as you go through the process, you realize that the best people to work with are the people who are already asking questions, not the people who are happily asleep. Because, and here's the punchline, the people who are choosing to sleep are doing it to protect themselves because they're not ready yet. So in my mystical heritage, we are taught that a human being lives for many thousands of years on this planet over a number of different, incarnations, right? And so you may be stood next to somebody in a line in the supermarket who is, let's say you're 40 years old, they're also 40 years old, but actually you've been to Earth 10 times before, and this is their first time. And for those people, they make themselves asleep so they can dwell in a sort of cocoon, because they're not ready yet to deal with the incredible challenges that truth brings. Because you know what it's like when you first wake up, it's very problematical, and it has effects in terms of who you work with, who you live with, who you sleep with, what books you want, what movies you want. Everything changes as you get involved in truth. It's very challenging, and I would say some people are better equipped than others to deal with that. So if we are going to engage in the business of, quote, waking people up, your choice, but choose the people who are already asking questions. There's no point in going down with signs outside the White House holding things up, or going on NPR as a guest and talking to them, because those people don't want to do that. So you go to where people are already asking questions. They're already saying, well, what is the Constitution? What is a sovereign state? What is a society? What does it mean? How can we do this better? There's millions of those people. They are more open to alternative, countercultural information than anyone else. So in my work, I'm constantly dealing with people who are saying, what's going on? How can I do this better? What can I do to change things? But I don't waste my time on people who choose to sleep. So I think there's a yes and a no to both. Is it to wake people up? Yes. Do you want to rattle the cage and beat them up like the guy in Nailed? No, not really, because it doesn't work like that. So you choose someone who's already doing it. And if you do take the image of that movie, the guys who are fighting both know there's something wrong with society, are both on the outside, they're both on the fringe, and they're both looking for answers. So you could say those two characters were already in a good position to wake up, whereas other people who have got, a wife and 3 kids and a mortgage and are heavily invested in the system emotionally, forget finance, emotionally, who maybe fought in Korea or Vietnam, believe in the flag, they're very hard, very, very hard to change what they feel. And it's not their information, it's their emotional investment in that system. So the other day I was in a bar, and I was sat at the bar talking to this guy, and he was a patriot, and he had his hat on, and it said US Navy and all this stuff. And he really was, Andrew, he really was a good man. He was a solid human being, the sort of guy you'd be glad to have as like your uncle or something, I knew that he believed in the flag and in his whatever Pledge of Allegiance. I knew that. And his patriotism was virtually bulletproof, right? And he was obviously an older guy. And so that would be someone who I would say, well, my way of respecting what he's doing is to say he is not going to, quote, wake up. He has to do that in his own time. And as I say, the punchline is you don't get one life to do it in, you get many. So you could safely leave everybody to do it at their own pace. To be more optimistic about it, though, I would say that there is a gradual increase, and there was an upswing in the last 20 years, I think, of people who are ready now to say, you know what, I'm tired of this. Let's ask some questions, and let's get together and discuss it, and let's make some changes. I think there's more people now saying that than there has been for many, many hundreds of years. So I'm very optimistic about this. So although I say don't worry about waking people up, there are what you might say is planetary forces, like a seasonal force every 2, 3, 4,000 years, that come into play and allow the minds of men and women to blossom. And so we come into that, what I would call like a springtime now. So like, the Indian fellas who would have these yuga cycles of darkness and light and golden ages. We come into the end of a cycle of ignorance and a cycle now of knowledge and gnosis and what the Greeks called nous, N-O-U-S, which is a sort of very connected spiritual awareness which eradicates ignorance, right? So in a mystical sense, you could say for the last few hundred years, we've been engaged in a process of preparing a new leadership of wise men and women to take over from the old empire. Because at the moment, if they disappeared overnight, all those elitists and globalists and illuminist agents, right, would be in a mess because we're not in a condition to properly govern ourselves yet. So there are many factors in this, Andrew. I agree with you. I think it is a complex story. But you have to take that deep view of it to say, if you're going to concentrate on waking people up, choose those who are already asking questions before you even ever showed up. They will come into illumination, in a good sense that is, in the way a child would come into illumination, or a flower. They will come into illumination with greater heart and strength and impact and endurance than anyone else. Because if you get someone who doesn't want to know, you might rattle the cage about Sandy Hook. I've done it once or twice myself. I'm not immune from that. Ask some questions and say, have you seen this? Have you looked at these faked photographs? Can you believe this? And it doesn't last very long, that awakening within them. It's like one of those little pilot lights on your heating system in your house. You blow it and it might go out. Whereas someone who's already asking questions, it's like a bloody furnace light inside, and it's not going to go out even in the hurricane. So I think it's incumbent on us to sort of gauge where people are at. So, presumably if someone's going to listen to your show, they're interested in these topics. So you're going to have the luxury of having a very able and informed audience. Whereas if you did this show on NPR, you'd have a big job on your hands, wouldn't you? You'd have a challenge, and you'd have loads and loads of unhelpful criticism and loads of negativity, because people don't want to know. They're not ready yet. So you have a different kind of network with a different kind of audience of people who are actively asking questions, and I think that's the big difference.
Right, and let's talk about mystics for a moment, because just like how esoteric, a lot of people are confused on what that means, and also the word occult, a lot of people seem to be confused on what that word means. The word mystic, mystical, it obviously comes from mystery and mysterious, but then again, people don't seem to have a stereotypical definition of what Neil, do you hear music in the background?
No.
No. Oh, I'm hearing music in the background. There seems like there's an ad on my computer somewhere. All right, hopefully it won't last very long. It's probably just... All right, it stopped. It's probably just... Oh, no, there it is again. All right, I'll try to work through this. You can't hear it. Hopefully my audience can't hear it. But I was saying...
no, I can't hear anything.
Okay, it's probably just on my end, but I'll just try to work through it. Mystical. Could you please clear up the confusion about what that word means, and maybe tell us in the process what a mystery is and how your work ties into the subject of mystics?
Yeah, a mystic is somebody who is engaged in understanding the nature of reality, right? So there's different words, roots, in etymology of mystikos and mustikos and mustes, and in French, mystique. And they all point to an engagement with reality, direct. So a philosopher thinks about it, if you like, as a third party. He sits back with his fountain pen to his lips and thinks about stuff. That's an indirect experience of reality, right? So you're thinking about it in abstract thought. A mystic goes out into the world and does stuff and investigates reality physically, personally, for themselves. So it's like a mystic is, in that sense, is more akin to an explorer or a pioneer rather than a philosopher who's more of a scholar or a researcher, if you get me drift, yeah? So mysticism is very practical. You go out and do it, like, again, let's take a fictional example. Gandalf is a mystic, right? So he changes the nature of reality in accordance with his will. And he does that through direct contact. He doesn't sit in an office and write books about it.
Now, hang on for a second. I just want to let you know, you can keep talking. I just need to hang up for a moment so I can see if I can get this sound because it keeps bothering me and there's advertisements running in the background. So you can just keep talking. If you don't hear me, that means I haven't logged on yet, but just carry on your thought. Keep telling us about mystics.
All right. So I'll speak to the audience. Hello. The mystic basically says, okay, life is mysterious. You can't know its reality secondhand. What you have to do is know it firsthand. And you do that through the instrument of your own life. So you don't just think about it from a detached, separate position. You go into it. So in examples of mysticism in culture, that's why these guys wear robes, go out with a staff, literally, as Merlin and Gandalf are based on these figures through Western Europe of the last 2,000 years, and through Persia of the last 3,000 years, and so on. And the mystic is somebody who devotes their life to knowing the nature of reality. And the only thing they use to do it is their own existence. So it's a very practical means of achieving knowledge. And as I said earlier to Andrew, Rudolf Steiner was someone who introduced many mystical ideas to people in education and agriculture and philosophy and psychology. George Gurdjieff, the Russian mystic, Russian-Armenian mystic. He's a modern mystic, someone who is a bit weird, a bit strange, but used his own life as a means of investigating reality. And also, you could say, in a way, that a lot of Asian philosophers and spiritual practitioners, particularly in India and China and Japan, move across that boundary of not just being people who talk about spiritual principles, but people who actually change themselves. So they have greater powers of things like ESP and greater powers of telekinesis and greater powers of telepathy. Why? Because they're changing how their mind works. It's not just the local structure inside the skull. It's a node on a network. It's part of a larger network. So mysticism blurs the boundary between the individual and the world at large, the world outside. And, there's many, many examples of this throughout history. But my argument to people is that today, mysticism is very significant because it helps us understand the nature of some of the challenges we face with empire, which is, the globalists, the elitists, with what they're doing to the planet and how we can change it. So mysticism says you can't resolve that problem just by thinking about it and talking about it. You have to do stuff. And the way you examine that doing is by achieving it in your own life, by living differently, thinking differently, conducting yourself differently, and moving in the world in a different way. So mysticism is very significant in that regard, and it's a word that's sort of fallen out of popular usage. So it makes you think of old things and strange people sat in the desert hovering on a cushion or something. There is that element to it, and in England we have this very funny lady called Mystic Meg, who's a sort of who was very popular in the 1990s, who was an astrologer, and she'd come along and she'd tell people about what's going to happen next week with your house and your car. So in England, the word mystic for the mainstream people conjures images of a celebrity, Mystic Meg. Actual usage in olden times only probably started to come back in, I don't know, the 1950s, 60s, 70s. So there was a British philosopher, Alan Watts, who was born in 1915 and died in 1973. Great man. And he introduced the idea of the mystic back to people and told us what it was and what it meant and how it was important. And it was really a luxury, in a way, to dedicate your life to the investigation of reality. And the mystic was somebody who chose that devotional lifestyle, like a monk chooses a devotional lifestyle, or a nun chooses a devotional lifestyle in much the same way a mystic would. You say, well, maybe it's not okay for me to have 5 children and a wife and a 9-to-5 job and a mortgage and 2 holidays a year in Florida. You know, maybe I can't do that and have the dedication to be a mystic, just like a monk could not do that and devote himself to divinity, to God. You can't do both. You can have an experience of both, but the devotional aspect of mysticism is very significant. So I think that's kind of an important consideration of this. And as I say, if you want an introduction to that, particularly that ties in with conspiratorial matters, examine the work of Manly P. Hall. Go and read The Secret Teachings of All Ages, which is really an important textbook in conspiracy research, because it gives you the background of many mystical groups to which bloodline families belong, and why they give a monkeys, why they give a hoot about special dates and ceremonies and occult practices and so on. Why should they care about that? So Manly P. Hall came along and told us about this stuff in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, before anyone else was doing it, really. You know, people were doing it, but in small publications, little private books and stuff. Hall came along and spoke to a mainstream audience, and you could walk into a facility, listen to the guy talk, and for most people, it was the first time that they realized that there was a connection between Egypt, Freemasonry, and the US government. You don't get more significant than that in 1950. So this was way before, you know, Alex Jones and David Icke and Jordan Maxwell, as you know, valuable and significant as some of their thoughts can be. These guys were the forefathers of it, and Manly P. Hall understood the connection between mysticism, secret societies, and modern Western governments. And the only difference now between what's happening in the world today and what happened when he was around is that government is all the more globalist now, and is all the more a single entity. Whereas not long ago it seemed very distinct in it. You know, you had communists in Russia, capitalists in America, the funny old Europeans with all their traditions and architecture, and then we had third world countries. That's not the same anymore. It is a globalist empire now, so it's even accelerated further because of one thing and another. But the principles that Hall was talking about are still relevant today. So very, very worthy of our consideration, I would say.
Thanks. There was a brief moment where I couldn't hear you talking when I logged off. I wasn't able to hear you.
That's all right. I just tried to talk at length.
All right. I hope the listeners didn't lose anything you heard about that for the brief moment I was off. But moving on, let's stop worrying about that. Hermetic stuff. I noticed the H in Hermetic is capitalized. That I'm going to guess that it ties back to Hermes, the messenger of the Greek gods, known as Mercury by the Roman gods, he was a messenger, and also that might tie in, some would say, to the subject of angels, because if you do the etymology on angel, you will find that it translates to messenger. I remember an episode of Ancient Aliens, Giorgio Tsoukalos talked about how angel has been mistranslated a few times, but if you translate it properly, it should go to messenger. So I'm guessing this stuff with Hermetics has to do with being a messenger of some sort. So enlighten me on what Hermetics is, enlighten everybody else for that matter.
Well, Hermeticism, or Hermetism as it probably is more accurately called, is a collection of mystical texts that share the work of a mysterious figure called Hermes Trismegistus, right? Who was a sage, who was apparently a great man of wisdom, who walked around a long time ago, and that's about as much as we know. You can also say that he is probably a conflation, that is, a combination of the Egyptian god Thoth and the Egyptian god Ra, and this Western figure Trismegistus, right? Thrice great. So all these different sources of wisdom come into one place, and there's a very small collection of codices of ancient texts gathered together, which is a very small book. You can buy it for a few dollars on Amazon.com. A very good example of it is called The Way of Hermes, which is a collection of these Hermetic texts, which are together are referred to as the Corpus Hermeticum. And I would also say to you and your audience, as we just mentioned with Manly P. Hall, if you really want to know what's going on with secret government, you will know more about that if you read the Corpus Hermeticum than probably any other single book, because it tells us some of the principles that they're trying to follow to gain control. So Hermeticism is about spiritual development. It's about life. It's about occult things. Occult simply meaning hidden. So we said esoteric means within. Occult means hidden. So the inside story. What's really going on, right? So corpus just means body, and Hermeticum is, of Hermetism or Hermeticism. So it's a kind of synthesis of Eastern and Western mystical practice. And it speaks of how the earth was made, what it's for, what we're here for, and what happens afterwards. So you don't get more philosophical, really. You don't get more provocative and stimulating. So for many people, people are familiar with the word archon is very popular again at the moment, as a kind of celestial being that messes around with planets. So we have an archon who was messing around with our planet. What the Corpus Hermeticum does is say, don't worry too much about that, because the way they describe it is they say, well, it's a creator being. It's like a conduit for creation. And one of the great secrets in Hermeticism, which is an open secret, you can read it in a line of text in that book, is that men are as powerful as the gods, right? Ties back to what I was saying earlier, in that you have to be careful about what was done to us, because our will is as ironclad and as powerful as the will of any gods, right? And when we say gods, you can say archons, extraterrestrials, whatever you want, right? Beings of potency and capability, let's just say that, whatever their nature is, whatever their substance is. And they have extraterrestrial, they're not on Earth as such, so they have an extraterrestrial aspect. They also have a divine aspect, because they come from a long time ago, and they stretch out through time to a degree that we can't imagine. So if you want to call them angels, fine. And yes, you are correct. The messenger aspect of angel law, Lora, is very important, because they are conduits for higher knowledge. So to have a visitation or a vision accompanied by a guardian or a gatekeeper or a messenger will take the form of a shape that fits your theology. So if you're a Christian, it would be an angel. If you are a conspiracy theorist, it might be a different kind of being. If you're a Gnostic, it might be a different kind of being, whatever, right? But these forms in Hermeticism I say, well, don't worry about what they are and what they're called, but there are beings on a physical level and a non-physical level that are responsible for shaping the earth. And what Hermeticism is trying to do is give men, as we would say now, people, humans, so it's not just the gender of man, but men means humans in this term, to give men the confidence that their will is enough to defeat any enemy. The will of man is supremely powerful. And I would say that one of the greatest tricks of empire, the control system, persuade us that we are weak. And I don't see that at all. I don't see that in any way, shape, or form. The only weakness is through choice, a choice of submission. But when you understand what will is and how it can change things, the game of empire, of imperial dominance on this planet is over. So I have a very optimistic attitude, although there's a lot of unpleasantness going on in recent decades. I think that empire is in trouble and is struggling, and they're just kind of scrambling to contain as much of the mess as they can. But that threshold of powerful humans is probably just about reached now. And empire is beginning to recede, and it's in its twilight. So I think that understanding Hermeticism gives us a better understanding of geopolitics and parapolitics, because you see in what they're seeing. Don't just have a passing interest in a cult. It's not just a ceremony. They do it for a very important reason. Understanding Hermeticism puts you in a better position to observe and analyze world affairs, because you see in what they're doing, not just the public thing that Barack Obama and Joe Biden and David Cameron are saying, but what they're actually doing behind the scenes, because they're following the same mystical principles that the Egyptians were, and that is Hermeticism.
And you mentioned Hermeticism has to do with the creation of the earth and why it was created, since you mentioned that, according to the Akashic records, Earth was created as a seventh-dimensional seed planet, one-of-a-kind planet. It was actually much, much bigger than what it is now. I believe like 50 times bigger. One of the more notable times when it got smaller was, as Zachariah Sitchin explained, when one of Nibiru's moons collided with Tiamat, which was what Earth was referred to, and like what was chopped off the Earth became the asteroid belt, and the rest became the Earth we know now. But the point is, it was a seventh-dimensional seed planet. Entities would be able to, I guess, go on Earth and rise up to the highest seventh-dimensional consciousness level that they can. Not that seventh-dimensional is necessarily the highest, but it is significant in some degree. I believe one of the significances behind seventh dimension is there is no more service to self once you get to seventh dimension, because even in the sixth dimension, like, everybody is really benevolent and all in the sixth dimension, but some of the things that they do are not entirely service to others. They do benevolent service to self things when they could do service to others, but in the seventh dimension, it's strictly service to others. That's my understanding from some people. But the point about Earth being created as a seventh dimensional seed planet, and no, the reptilian aliens were not the first to colonize Earth. I mean, some say they may have been the first to plant the flag, so to speak, in terms of colonies from other planets coming to Earth, but they were not the first ones here. There were benevolent entities that were here before them as part of the creation of Earth as a very large seventh dimensional seed planet. So how does that tie in with Hermeticism, excuse me?
That's a hell of a question, Andrew. That's a hell of a question. Many things to say there. I would say that, again, put a question mark on when you say the Akashic record says. I don't think anybody can tell you what the Akashic record says, period. No one on this planet alive today can tell you what that says. It doesn't happen. So I would just say that, and we can debate that offline perhaps, but somebody says it. A man said something. That's the way I think of it. A man said something which rings true to me and is helpful. Okay, good. Right? Zachariah Sitchin has said some things that ring true and might be helpful. Good, excellent. But it's not the way things are. It's one man's view of something. And there's really in higher knowledge, zero evidence for any of this. There can't be. It doesn't exist. There isn't. It's one man's encounter with reality. And sometimes we find that useful. What I do is I see how many times across the board I keep coming across the same thing. A 7-dimensional space is something that arises very frequently in comparative mystical studies. So whether you're looking at Aboriginal mysticism or Aboriginal spirituality is probably a better way of saying it, in Australia, Western Australia, or whether you're looking at very sophisticated German and French mystical practices of the 17th and 18th century, you'll see the same thing. Same in African, same in Western, same in the Western esoteric tradition. 7 dimensions. It is interesting what you say about service to self, because my understanding of it is similar, although there's slight detail differences, which really are neither here nor there. But self ceases to exist after the dimension. So there isn't service to self or others possible. There is only one. But service to self can exist in the 4th and 5th, right, to a degree. And that's why you get these seemingly omnipotent superpower beings who to us appear like gods. But really, in the grand scheme of things, they are contained to a lower dimensional space because they can't go any further because they're trapped in self. And self cannot proceed. Let's not worry about which dimension it is. It really is neither here nor there right now. We just don't know. But let's say there is a dimensional space which is part of our destiny to move into when we're good and ready. You don't do it in 100 years, more like a few thousand. And when you get to that space, polarity ceases. So in answer to your question, what does Hermeticism, how does it tie into this broader picture of the idea of a seed planet, of a school for growth, which I agree with. I think that's a legitimate viewpoint that has many, many overlapping intersections from many areas of study from people throughout the ages who have agreed on this. And then it starts to gain traction for me. But none of this comes from the Akashic record, in my view. It comes from the experiences of individuals who have said this for themselves, which is good enough. That's good enough. And if it works, follow it. But don't imagine it's reality. What Hermeticism tells us is that polarity is part of the challenge of being on Earth, to have good and evil. It initially looks like good and evil, which is really simple. And if it was that simple, life would be okay. We'd all join the great good army and crush evil, right? It would be easy, like in Lord of the Rings, easy peasy. It isn't like that. So as we progress in our spiritual development, speaking classically here, you'll learn it's not good and evil as such. It's wholeness and fragmentation, which is a better way of saying it. So goodness is mentioned in Hermeticism, and it's as a capital G to indicate it's not just the normal word goodness, like this is good or this is tasty or this is attractive. It's something else. And what they're indicating is this comes from the divine. This comes from a source that has harmony and perfection and strength and clarity. And goodness is what we would perhaps have the word wholeness for it, right? Something that is whole and authentic, and genuine and sincere. Fragmentation is where all of that falls to pieces and somebody is seen to be not whole. So let's say Joe Biden, let's say, is an example. I don't think you mind me saying this. Seems to be all right. He's got a nice smile. He shakes hands with people. He does this. He does that. He's in a democratic. But really, if you get with the guy and talk to him, you realize that that's very disingenuous and there's something wrong with him. And that is the sort of polarization that comes when you have fragmentation. So in that individual who has as much right to be here as anyone else, he is currently experiencing fragmentation, which the quick and dirty word for it is evil, which just means he is falling to pieces. His soul is in danger of dissolution, right, which is a very serious thing. And if you are going to run an empire, you can only really do it with people who have damaged souls. So again, this is a very esoteric business, isn't it, talking like this? Because we can talk about geopolitics and keep people in the mainstream slightly interested. But when you start talking about damaged souls in world government, a lot of people find that tricky. But I would just say that fragmentation is part of the problem on Earth. And so what Hermeticism is suggesting, as far as I read it, is that to come here as a human being is to participate in the resolution of that problem of polarity. Say, wholeness, good, fragmentation, bad. That is a problem. That whole thing is a problem. How do we resolve it? And so we put our hand up on some distant star and say, I want to go to Earth and check it out. I know it's bizarre, I know it's a struggle, and I know it's difficult, but I want to volunteer to go to that freaky planet, as beautiful and terrible as it is. I am going to go and take a look at it and participate in that polarity and maybe contribute to its resolution. And when that happens, the nature of what goes on Earth radically changes and empire recedes. And I think we're seeing the beginning of that process now. So although it seems a bit overwhelming at times, I don't think it is. I think empire are on the way out.
All right. Excuse me. Let's talk about alchemy now, because there seems to be a lot of confusion about what alchemy is and what it isn't. I mean, most people say it's turning worthless metals into valuable metals like gold and silver, but in reality, it goes much deeper than that. My understanding of it is that it's to make everything pure and new again, not necessarily turn the world into a utopia, but still make things better by refreshing, rejuvenating, and starting anew, even though you're not necessarily new, you're still making it seem like things are new. And I want to point out an interesting statement made by some people, salvia divinorum. You can buy it legally off the internet in many jurisdictions. However, it is said by some, like Terence McKenna, that you should not use salvia unless you are a shaman, because salvia and some other psychoactive substances, for that matter, are used by shamans to attain alchemy or do alchemy of the highest degree. Now, that also does raise a question of, okay, what is meant by alchemy in that sense? So in regards to discussing what alchemy is, how it ties into refreshing and rejuvenating things, and also what is meant by the statement, don't do salvia unless you're a shaman, because shamans who do alchemy of the highest order are the only people that should do salvia. Get into that as well. Enlighten us on this subject, please.
Yeah, another great question. You're feeding me with some good stuff here, Andrew. Thank you. Okay, so alchemy at the base level is laboratory alchemy, where you take a substance and you make it into another substance. So the idea is that there is a number of elements, 4 or 5, depending on how you look at it: earth, water, fire, air. And those elements make up everything in the world. So your iPhone, your laptop, your car, your shoes, your feet, the teeth in your mouth, the heart beating in your chest, the sun in the sky, all of it is an elemental configuration. And it is possible to reduce any configuration, any object in the world, to a state of, there's a funny word for this, disequilibration, right? Which means it's neither one thing nor another. So let's say in a science laboratory, they take an apple, right, and they try and teleport it from pod A to pod B, right? And they're doing experiments at a particulate level like this in England at the moment, teleporting particles, right? But if you take a complex object like an apple, it's very difficult to do. So at the point where it's neither in pod A, so it's ceased to be in pod A, and it's neither is it in pod B yet, because it hasn't arrived yet. In the middle, it's just been reduced to its, state of disequilibration. That is, it's just a scramble of particles. And it's not an apple anymore. It's nothing. And when you reduce something to that state, it's just like a blob of particles. You can make it into something else. So That's alchemy. It's learning the art of turning one form into another. Now, you could say you could do that with a thought or a feeling, or you could do it with an object, like a lump of lead, turn it into a lump of gold. Great. But those are all things in the world. A dream is a thing. You can't touch it, but it's still a thing, isn't it? A car on the road, a truck on the road is a thing. And the level of alchemy that you're capable of is dependent on how you can change yourself. So that's one of the keys of alchemy. So that's where we tie in with Kenner. Very interesting man. I was speaking to one of his friends actually just the other day, so it's funny that you mention him. Salvia divinorum, which is a plant, a sage plant, diviner's sage, is a potent and important medicine for mystical exploration, right? Where it ties into alchemy and what you might be suggesting here with the quote that you passed on to us is that it does have a property for reducing a form disequilibration, which means that if you take salvia for a very brief moment at the peak of that brief experience, if it's taken through fire, that is to smoke it, it's 3-4 minutes in, a 7-minute plateau, and 3 or 4 minutes out. So it's all over and done within a quarter of an hour. Not like ayahuasca where you lay on the floor vomiting for 8 hours. It's different. It's very fast. So like a DMT hit, very quick, very fast, over and done with. But at a point during that, you do cease to be quite what you were. Not to anyone in the room looking at you, you look just the same. But in your own reality tunnel, borrowing a term from Robert Anton Wilson there, in your own reality tunnel, you cease to be quite as firm as you were for a moment. And that's the alchemical aspect of salvia. Now, ordinarily, it doesn't really matter. That happens every night when you go to sleep. Certain kinds of dreams do that to a human being. They reduce them to an energetic state. And when you're in that state, you're usually quite safe and sound. And the universe has all kinds of clever fail-safes to make sure you can't mess that up. But when you are in a state of fuzziness, where you reduce to an energetic condition, not just a physical manifestation, but more energetic, that can be tapped into. So if I was wanting to mind control you, Andrew, I would put some kind of substance like salvia into your body, and I would know when you're at the peak of that experience, and you are very controllable and malleable at that point, and then I can come into your being and program you to do certain things, or heal you, or encourage you, or support you, or whatever. It doesn't matter. Like with many things in the chemistry of this, you can do anything. So once something is, quote, in the crucible, you can either destroy it or you can amplify it, one or the other. So it is important to be careful with a lot of hallucinogenic medicine and tryptamines. So dimethyltryptamine is a slightly different thing. It's significant, though, all of them, because with many of them, and salvia is one of them, they do reduce the particulate form to a state of increased elasticity. And again, we're speaking very esoterically. This has no foundation in, normal physical sciences. You'd be laughed out of the lecture room if you started saying this at university. We're not doing that. We're speaking about mystical ethnobotany, if you like it, and we're speaking about energetic forms. And so the thing to be careful of, the challenge, is that it's medicine. And it's medicine to be used infrequently and wisely, and preferably with a skilled practitioner. Now, if you really know what you're doing, you might be able to cut some corners on that. But if you don't, just like you were taking a very powerful medicine in a center of healing, you want a healer with you while you're doing it, so they can instruct you on what will happen, how you prepare your body and mind for it, what the prognosis is, what happens during the experience, and somebody to support and guide you through that. If you just do it to get off your head while you're watching, American football and eating a pizza, you are going to have problems. It might be a laugh, but you are tainting the structure of your form. So hallucinogens for recreational purposes is a very profoundly unwise thing to do. It's medicine. It's medicine. Like tobacco is medicine, right? So like me, myself, I've smoked on and off for many years, and it's a challenge. Yeah, I understand that. Marijuana, cannabis is a medicine, right? So it's to be used for medicinal purposes from time to time when you need it. And it's there to show us what we're capable of. So the plant says, this is how I experience reality. This is my gift to you. What are you going to do with it? So the very worst thing you can do is just repeatedly accept its gift and learn nothing. The plant is showing you how it experiences reality and sharing its experience with you. So Salvia is saying, look how I can deconstruct a form, and look what you can make new from it. You can make anything from it if you know how. If you have a powerful mind, you can make anything from it. This is what I can do. And it's like, that's why people call them plant teachers, because they're showing us a different kind of experience with reality. So if you were part of a mystical order 1,000 years ago in Europe, you would be taught alchemy, would be part of your basic training, because that is skill on earth that we had for a long time, a long, long time. And it's only in this sort of post-Atlantean world that we have some of these challenges now where that's gone. Not forever, it's just been buried, as it were. But it's starting to come back. So these people who can help share information, as we said, people like Manly P. Hall, he opens doors. He's not going to show you what's in the room. People never do that because it's considered poor form to do that. If you see a thing of transcendent beauty, of great knowledge and illumination, you realize that it's not for everybody because it doesn't help. It destroys the man who isn't ready. So you know that line in Blade Runner, the flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long. That's kind of like an old spiritual axiom, slightly reworded, which is to say, if you can't hold the flame in your hands because you've not prepared yourself, it will burn you. Very high-level transcendent wisdom of Earth history, for example, is super luminous, and it destroys those who are not ready for it. So it's like a teacher who loves his pupils in the classroom, like, say, a really wonderful science teacher, and he's not going to mess them up by sharing something that totally overturns everything that they've been learning. They have to get there themselves first. But what he can do out of respect and love for them is show them the doorway to that experience and say, you're going to have to walk through this on your own, and it takes a long time, years and years and years. But here it is. Here is the doorway. And so that's what we're trying to do with all this material, is to say that mystical and esoteric knowledge provides all of us with the locations, if you like, the coordinates of these doorways to different disciplines like alchemy, different studies like Hermeticism. And through understanding those, that's the only way, in my view, to get a proper view and understanding of what is occurring on this planet. And you can only do it for yourself. Nobody else can tell you it or show you it. You can only do it for yourself. No one else can do it for you.
Thanks, and let's talk about inventive language here, because I'm looking at your things here in your bio of all the things that seem worth talking about. Inventive language. I mean, inventing language. I mean, do you really want to do that? Because wouldn't it be great if we could just all communicate with our heart? I mean, interestingly, not that long ago, I'm currently reading Zachariah Sitchin's third book, The Wars of Gods and Men. Almost finished it. He did talk about in that book the whole Tower of Babel story, or is it Babel, whatever you pronounce it. And by the way, it's not an accident that the word Babel does come from Tower of Babel, because he talked about how that incident did confuse all of our languages in such a way. And if that hadn't happened, then I'm sure we'd be in a much higher state of consciousness where we could communicate either cyclically or through our heart, and we wouldn't have to invent language. So this whole subject of inventive language, what is it, and why would you even want to invent languages when we should all just communicate with our heart?
Inventive language is using language wisely. To say, if you just go with the language you were taught in high school, you won't be able to communicate properly. I'll give you an example. The great linguist and philosopher, the American Robert Anton Wilson, he said that when you can control your language, you can control your mind, and not before. So you have to understand first that if you want to transcend something, and I hear what you say about communicating through the heart, I think that's an important consideration. But to transcend a thing, you first have to master it. So you cannot transcend your current state of affairs until you've mastered it. And what language does is give you better capabilities over thought, right? And then once you've reached a certain level, you can then dispense with it. So you try and think about something without words in your head, you'll find that very difficult. You try and imagine a situation mentally and abstract thought in your head now. Without words, you won't be able to do it. You can have an image of something, but to actually forecast and think and analyze, words are very potent with that. And it's a phase, it's a developmental phase, and it will pass. But while we're still in it, to have command over language, just by learning how to use it, is very significant. So if you have only 100 words in your vocabulary, your ability to articulate reality is limited. And part of my business is to articulate things, right? It doesn't define who I am, but it's something that I do. It's one of the tools in my tool bag or whatever. In 1984, George Orwell said that the greatest threat to freedom was the diminishment of the vocabulary. Not guns in your face or boots in your teeth, but the loss of words in the dictionary. So to have a broad vocabulary and to be able to use language inventively, so like Robert Anton Wilson, for example, as I was saying, he popularized the term that was invented by Leary, which was reality tunnel, right? So what he's saying with that is we each have a reality tunnel through which we all have an encounter with reality, and they are quite distinct from each other. So your experience of reality, Andrew's reality tunnel, is not the same as Neil's reality tunnel. It's perfectly different. It's customized to you, and it's articulated and empowered by you, not me or anyone else, by you. And everybody has their own reality tunnel. So when somebody says to me, hey, do you know that on October the 13th, the October surprise, there's going to be a giant incoming triangle, I think, well, that's your reality tunnel, and I can acknowledge and respect that. But it isn't mine, nor do I think it's a consensus reality tunnel, which consensus is just where reality tunnels overlap, right? So many of us have a consensus reality tunnel that trees grow, have a trunk and have branches and usually have green things on them. That's a consensus reality tunnel where many tunnels intersect and agree on that, right? So this is an example of inventive language, not inventing, inventive, where you're using terms to provide us with a better thought for something. So it means that we don't have to say, this guy's talking bullshit or this guy's talking brilliantly. You don't need to say that. You can say, well, that's his reality tunnel. So he believes that. That's his experience. And I can very happily acknowledge that and recognize it. But it isn't mine. So you don't have to judge it right or wrong, you see. So a key component of what I teach in my living philosophy with the people that I work with on a year-by-year basis is that you don't have to judge something to be right or wrong straight away. You can just have another file that says, to be investigated, I don't know. So most people in the West are taught immediately say this is fantastic or this is horseshit. And you don't know. You just don't know the difference between the two. We don't have enough information to make that call usually. Because as I say, again, I'll repeat this, there is no evidence for higher knowledge. All higher wisdom on earth has no proof, zero evidence. There isn't any by design. So you can't evidence the most important things by design. And the reason for that is it makes the individual have to do it for themselves. So we don't end up being followers. We end up being masters of our own reality. So language, as William Burroughs once said, is a virus, right? And if you get that virus and you're restricted to using that, it's going to contain and repress your ability to think. So the way to explode it is to own your language, to own it, and to become proficient enough in it that it no longer determines the way you think. You can use it to a certain level, but then you can dispense with it and switch to another method of communication, which is direct through what I would call will. So heart is what connects us to each other. It is through will that we communicate different. So similar principles to what you're saying. It doesn't really matter that we're using different words. But to get past language, first we have to take control of it. That's my view.
Okay, just so you know, we as soon as I'm done talking here, you'll have about 22 minutes or so to finish the show. I'd like to try to finish up on two subjects. If we can do a third, great.
Sure.
But actually, the last thing I guess we'll talk about, it says here you have spent time with several orders dedicated to the wisdom of the ancient world. I'd like to give you a chance to play the role of primary source and tell us who those orders are and what you learned about the ancient world. But before we do that, I would like to talk about the subject of infighting, because this does tie into embracing truth, confronting the negative, and transforming the self. Because in the truth movement community, there are many examples of infighting, which could, many say, pose as a barrier and a hindrance to us breaking out of this prison planet matrix. The 9/11 truth movement is particularly notorious for this. There are two things about 9/11 that are so obvious and easy to prove, but many people in the 9/11 truth movement don't want to talk about it because, well, for some reason they think it would discredit the truth movement because, well, the subject just maybe sounds too crazy to some people, they think, and that is it can be proven that the planes that hit the Twin Towers were holograms. Trying to prove the exact technology that was used is harder to determine because the government has several technologies to do that, but it can be proven that they were holograms, and also it can be proven the buildings were dustified by some sort of direct energy weapon. I mean, trying to prove which kind of direct energy weapon is hard, but it is so obvious. The fact that the buildings were microscopic.
I agree.
Dust,
I totally agree, yeah.
The dead giveaway there, but a lot of people in the truth movement don't want to talk about that, and that's nothing compared to what Andrew Bashago told me. I had Andrew Bashago on my show. He's tried to tell the world that the U.S. government knew 9/11 was going to happen in 1971 when they used time travel technology to look into the future and see the attacks happen, and he said the 9/11 truth movement has actually called him a kook, which is pretty ironic if you think about it, and he also said the 9/11 truth movement has put him on their list of people never to allow to show up at like 9/11 conferences and such, and they even had security escort him out of the conference and take him to a taxi cab, and they tell him, get out of here, you're going to discredit the truth movement if you talk about time travel stuff. Now that's one good example of infighting, the whole 9/11 thing, but also ETs and UFOs. A lot of people, ET and UFO, you talk about that, they'll say, well, please don't talk about that. The moment you talk about that, it's going to turn people off. Now, I'm the kind of guy that it's like, I don't give a shit what other people think about me, and if they want to discredit me because of the stuff I talk about, great. If they try to discredit me, then karma's going to come back to haunt them. I like giving them discrediting ammunition, and if the sheeple don't want to believe it, that's their problem. I just go all out with the stuff I talk about, but the problem is a lot of people in the truth movement don't want to do that for the examples I gave, and that can lead to infighting. So to solve this problem of infighting, what do you suggest? And you'll have about 19 minutes to talk about this and the other subject I wanted to talk about.
Infighting doesn't help at all. And if I was an imperial agent, which I'm not, I mean, it might be interesting to try that out, but I don't think so. I'm just an independent observer and participant. But if they said to me, okay, you join our ranks, and what we need you to do is mess up this, as you call it, truth movement, 9/11 truth movement, the first thing I'd do is introduce elements that oppose each other and that create disharmony. And once you've feeded in that and you've founded those oppositional, combative opponents, you can just stand back and watch it dismantle itself. You don't really have to do much more after that. And that, in the 9/11 movement, I don't think there is a 9/11 movement personally, but it's just some people who are saying some things. But there's some people who are really trying to get to the bottom of it. And then there's some people who are seeking acceptance, right? And I think the solution to what you're looking at is this, that if you really want to know what happened on 9/11, then you can't really be friends with the 9/11 truth movement because they don't want to know that. What they want is acceptance. They want public and governmental, quote, official acceptance that it wasn't 19 Arab hijackers that did that stuff. They don't want to know exactly what happened because once you drill down into that, it introduces paradigm-cracking, head-splitting things like holograms and directed energy weapons and off-world forces and parallel timelines and all kinds of stuff that most people who have 1 foot or 2 feet in the mainstream world cannot handle or deal with. So I understand what they're trying to do. If they said, what we're trying to do is get a progressive, smart, good mix of libertarian, liberal, progressive, conservative government, just good men, good people with a nice balance, open-minded, who will accept that there's something wrong and will help us set the record straight and have a new commission and get the real story out. I think that many 9/11 truthers, that's a goal. I think it's a very ignorant and stupid goal, personally. Although I respect the individuals, I think the goal is wrong. And subconsciously, in certain individuals that I've met at conferences who speak about these things, what they're really looking for is personal acceptance, which is something totally different, right? And it's very foolish to seek acceptance in your workplace. I don't care what your work is. It could be shoveling garbage or delivering, intellectual material to the world government. I don't care what your work is. Never define yourself by your activities in the workplace. Never do that. It's a very foolish thing to do. And I think a lot of people involved in exposing what happened on 9/11, that's what they're doing. And so it's very emotional for a lot of those people. It's not just what happened. It's an emotional journey for those people. So there is a distinct difference, this is the answer really, between seeking a goal, which is to say, we want acceptance that 9/11, it was something else that happened, and actually finding out what happened. I'll tell you what it's a bit like. It's a bit like in a court of law, there's different judicial protocols and systems that will say, okay, there's one kind of court where all they want to do is understand what happened. Let's say somebody killed somebody in mysterious circumstances, right? Person A killed person B. We're not sure how, what, when, who, why, or what he did it with, but that happened. One kind of court is set up and committed to piecing together the events of that day and finding out actually what happened with that murder. Who did what were they wearing, what was the murder weapon, why did they do it, what did it look like, all the details with a fine-tooth comb, right? There's another kind of court, which is the one that we have, which says we're not trying to do that. What we're trying to do is determine guilt or innocence. That's all. And we're trying to attain a guilty verdict beyond reasonable doubt or whatever, right? So if there's reasonable doubt, we have to say that, well, they're innocent. If it's past that, if we can push it to say, well, to be honest, it looks very likely that this person did something bad. We don't know what it is, and we may never know, and perhaps we don't even care, but we've got our guilty verdict, right? That's the difference between those who are investigating what happened, quote, and those who are looking for a verdict of acceptance of guilt or innocence. I think they're two completely distinctive things. And I did a 9/11 special with Mel Fabregas and Judy Wood, and this guy, Professor Larson, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. And we talked about these things, and you'll be familiar with Judy Wood, and she's essentially saying, I'm not going to tell you why and who and what and where, but I can tell you that there was a technology used that dematerialized matter. I'm probably not getting that quite right, technically speaking, but you get the idea. There was some sort of beam weapon used. It wasn't how we thought it was at first, which is shape charges down the sides or whatever. That's what we all thought. We don't think it was that. And I'll tell you another thing, Andrew, you'll be interested in this. David Shaler, an ex-intelligence officer for the British Secret Services, told me to my face that there were no planes on 9/11. Right? And he told me that many, many years ago. And he was the first person to say that. And at first I thought, what on earth are you talking about? I didn't quite understand what he meant. And a year later, I did understand what he meant. And coinciding with that, he gave a talk at the Glastonbury Symposium in England. And he started to go, quote, bonkers, right? So something had happened to that man where 1 minute he was a cohesive, intelligent, gathered together individual telling us about events of 9/11. And the next minute he was telling us that it was the reincarnation of King Arthur and Jesus Christ. That's his reality tunnel. I'm not disputing that. I'm not interested in the veracity of that one way or the other. He then started dressing up as a woman and changed his gender or whatever. I don't know if he did it physically, and he became, not as an individual, because I don't know him in that manner, but as a figure in the 9/11 movement, discredited. And yet it was he who said, first of all, to my face, there were no planes on 9/11, right? So I have direct experience with what one man said to my face. This isn't evidence, it's just what somebody said. But I think he's right. And I think that's one of the most explosive pieces of information about 9/11. Because if that's true, then a level of technology exists that we didn't quite appreciate before. Now, we've seen some of the Japanese guys with the lake monsters and stuff. So I remember when we were talking about holographics in a conference once, somebody said, well, this is what they can do already, right? And the military are usually 25 years ahead of it. So imagine now they can project a hologram of nearly anything into 3D open space in the daylight, anything, easy, right? We don't know that technology exists. So it's unbelievable, literally unbelievable. Even if you wanted to, it's like a movie say, I can't believe it, I can't accept that. And if you have been trained in imperialist, Western, reductionist education system, your impulse will be to call it nonsense and say, well, that's nonsense. Now you're talking science fiction. We can't have this guy on. He's talking science fiction. So I don't know Andrew Bashago or whatever. I'm familiar with some of his ideas. I haven't met the man, so I can't comment on him. Whatever. He has some ideas and theories, and let's say they represent some of the broader theories of other people. He's someone who's trying to look at what happened. That's not what the 9/11 Truth Movement are doing. It's something totally different. So if you really want to know what happened, you have to say to yourself, I am now going to preclude myself from any sort of formal 9/11 Truth Movement because that damages what they're trying to do. You can't have acknowledgement if you're delivering, a 1,000-page report which talks about directed energy weapons, holograms, off-world spacecraft, time distortion, time dilations, Nazis, and stuff like that, because it doesn't fit in with the unreality that we're given every day. So reality as we see it is just fiction. It's what I call unreality, or I call it the construct, or, the Matrix. I used to refer to it as the Matrix. The Matrix isn't reality. It's a story that's just been repeated a lot and seems to be real, but it isn't. So if you deviate too far from that, you end up alienating yourself from 99% of the people who buy into it. Now, I personally don't mind doing that. My whole life is that, right? Everything I do every day is outside of that. But I like to be able to walk inside it and liaise with those people and go to the grocery store and be a civil, decent human being if I go in the line in the DMV or the post office or something, right? So I want to be able to conduct myself and navigate those waters with some sensibilities, right? But philosophically and ontologically, in terms of how things are, I completely couldn't care less what any truth movement or community is doing, unless they are 100% focused on what happened. That's the only thing worth focusing on. The only thing worth focusing on. And I would, again, just emphasize, and I know I'm overstressing this point a bit, most truth movements are not trying to do that. They're not trying to say what happened. They're trying to make a case for legitimacy. And that's not a good idea. So they're shooting themselves in the foot with that.
Yeah, they are. And, well, I guess we'll finish the show on this. Even though the clock here says 7 minutes, 45 seconds, I can go over, but I really don't want to go over too much after 2 hours.
No, I can fit it in 7 minutes, yeah.
Okay, it says here you have spent time with several orders dedicated to the wisdom of the ancient world. Okay, play the role of primary source. Tell us what orders you were in and what the orders you were in and what are some of the important things. The clocks, you got 6 minutes, 45 seconds if you can do that.
Well, when you join one of these orders, one of the things you say is, I won't tell anyone what it is, so I'm not going to tell you what that is. But if you get your secret teachings of all ages and flip through it, you'll see examples of things that are very similar. A more precise answer, which is a little bit more respectful, is that there are the groups that I have studied with are men who come together, and it is usually men, I'm sad to say. I wish there were more women, but for some reason there aren't. Perhaps they've got more sense, I don't know. But it's men who come together and say, let us synthesize the wisdom from the groups who have knowledge about Earth and about mankind, which is the most effective. And we don't care where that comes from. We're committed to harmony and wholeness. So we don't want to stamp on anybody. We don't want to do any weird stuff. All we want to do is understand what's going on. So through that is the answer to your question. There are Hermetic principles. So you could say Neil Kramer studied with a Hermetic group. That's correct. And that's all you need to say. What they're called won't make any difference because nobody will have heard of it anyway. So each group has their own different names. There are also offshoots of that. So Rosicrucianism, for example, this isn't something I've personally put my name on, as it were, but they are a Hermetic offshoot, and that has a very worthwhile and interesting mythology and philosophy that you can understand through people like the guy who wrote Max Heindel, who wrote The Rosicrucian Cosmoconception. Very interesting, very, very interesting, and very pertinent to some of the things we've looked at. The problem with these groups is that they can be sequestered. So as we know with our Freemason friends, a lot of that has gone offline. I also know there's some wonderful Freemasons out there, I'm not a Freemason, who do great work and are men of honour and integrity and wouldn't harm a hair on anybody's head, and they do wonderful things in the world. So what Empire does is sequester the secret nature of these groups, which was originally designed to protect them from the Christianization process, which wasn't anything happy. It was just mass slaughter across Europe and the world. Secrecy was to protect men and women who thought differently. That's all it was for. It wasn't because they were special or because the knowledge was particularly something out of this world. It was to protect people from execution, right? But that secret framework has been used to shield globalists from public scrutiny. So you have to be very careful that you choose a group of men of honor and integrity and spiritual wisdom. And you can tell that in 10 minutes, because they all have a probation period or whatever. So if you were lucky enough, someone said, there's this great group that I belong to, come and study with us, Andrew, check it out, come to the open night and see what you think. You have a feeling for it straight away. You think, no, that's rubbish. I'm not coming back to that. It's stupid. And, or you think, well, it's kind of interesting, actually, and these guys seem like really cool, Then you have a look. You study it. It's a school. You go in, you learn stuff, you get out. You're not meant to stay in it. It's not like you get it tattooed on your head and that's what you are. It's just a college course, and it might last a year, it might last 10 years. That's up to you. So wherever the wisdom is, go and seek it, go and find it, go and attach yourself to it. And then when it's time to leave, you leave. And that's how you protect yourself from being programmed or conditioned. You become master of your own curriculum. Your college is yourself, right? And what you pass through is always temporary. So that's the way you can have the best of both worlds.
Thanks. And since we got a little over 3 minutes left, one quick final point that we have time for. Matt Kahn, in an interview he did with Helene Lipson, recently said that September 27th, it's the day of a full moon. 1/3 of humanity will resonate with 5D consciousness on planet Earth on that day. You got 2 minutes. Do you have any comments about that?
I doubt it. I can't imagine that many people are ready for anything that would resemble 5D consciousness. Let's be optimistic, though. Energies are changing on a planetary level that make the awakening process easier. So if there's been a lot of people sat on the fence, this coming 3-year period, which has its own descriptions in mystical language, this coming 3 years, starting today, going forward 3 years, is a very happy time for those who choose growth and truth and knowledge. And so who knows? Who knows what will happen on a particular day? And if it does, fantastic. Personally, I can't see that because there's a lot of people who just do not display any readiness for it. But they might be out there hiding and we haven't seen them. I would put it in the small millions, 5, 10, 20 million maximum, who are ready for any sort of transcendent experience. But to talk about billions, I think is unlikely.
All right, well, you're entitled to your opinion. Just want to point out, though, that some people say there's going to be heavy extraterrestrial involvement this time, and Alfred Weber, in my interview with him, did say that Fukushima is a global extinction event, and the ETs are going to help save us by putting us into higher consciousness, even if there aren't people awake. I don't want to make everybody think that we should believe that and sit like couch potatoes on the couch and do nothing because the ETs are going to save us, because that's the worst thing we can do. Try to speed up the process, if anything, if you can. But, hey, I just want to throw that out to know that there are ET forces out there watching us, and it's worth acknowledging that regardless of whether or not Fukushima is or isn't a global extinction event. But, Neil, since we have come to the end of this show, I'm going to tell you the same thing I tell all of my guests. It's a hard thing to say, but I have to say it because, well, it's done for the sake of making my show impartial. One of my goals with this show is to get as many different people on the show as possible before I start giving any one specific guest double dips, as I feel that is the fairest, most impartial, and ultimately the most informative way to do a radio show. You are a fascinating individual, and I'll make sure I spread this interview far and wide so this information goes out. But because of my mission to keep getting different people on, I do regret to say that does mean that I probably will not be asking you to come on my show again, but please understand it's only because there's thousands of other fascinating individuals who deserve some glory on my show. I'm glad you were able to laugh at
that's great.
Yeah, I'm glad you're able. Yeah, a lot of the trolls on YouTube seem to pick on me for saying that. They seem to like to make.
No, that's great, Andrew. You keep doing it.
Okay. Well, that is the end of the show. So, without further ado, namaste. Take care. Keep waking people up, and hopefully, humanity will wake out of its slumber very, very soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Later. Bye. Well, folks, that's the end of this show. I will have next week Farusha. Or is it Farusa? I'm not exactly sure how the name is pronounced. She is a psychic from New York. I met her at the MUFON conference. She was a vendor there in Cherry Hill, the MUFON Symposium. So Farusha next week. Hope to have you on. Without further ado, and namaste. Enjoy the rest of your trek throughout infinite consciousness, everybody. This is Andrew Fisher, signing off.